So although this is a review talk, I'll be showing a lot of my own results as well. And those results were developed in collaboration with many people whom I have listed here on the title slide. Right. So, I mean, all of us are familiar, of course, of the uh, where the epoch of reionization and dark ages are located in the cosmic history. And most of us in this conference are also probably on the same page as to why 21 centimeter is such an amazing probe for these two cosmological epochs. So, a natural question for my talk is, why should we spend time on understanding other probes at all? So, in my opinion, there are three distinct advantages for 21 centimeter community to pay attention to non 21 centimeter probes of reionization. The first is that these probes provide complementary constraints on IgM thermal and ionization history, often to a degree at which 21 centimeter will not be able to provide. So these constraints can act as priors in any 21 centimeter analysis, or they can even assist in experimental design for 21 centimeter experiment. The second reason is that just like the IgM, they constrain the other side of the equation, the sources of reionization, where 21 centimeter again might not be able to do as good a job as some of these probes. And again, these constraints are also either priors or helpful in setting the experimental design. And finally, the third reason we should be interested in non 21 centimeter probes is perhaps the most important, which is that I think these probes will be crucial in verifying the cosmological origin if we have any claimed detection of the 21 centimeter signal. Okay. So, for example, in the edges signals detection, we already saw that there is a lot of discussion about alternative ways of looking at that redshifts. And one of the difficulties has been that there are few ways of looking at that redshift. So these other probes are relevant for that. So there are these three reasons why we might want to pay some attention towards the work that is happening on these other in these other directions. So what I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to discuss four non 21 centimeter probes of reionization. Okay, one is the first I will discuss is the metal line intensity mapping of the reionization epoch. Second probe I will discuss is the Lyman alpha forest. Then I will discuss what we can learn about reionization from the CMB, the cosmic microwave background, and I will end with a discussion of high redshift galaxy surveys. Okay, so let's start. So my first topic is metal line intensity mapping. So we have already discussed intensity mapping in this conference in the last couple of days. We have had excellent talks. For example, Saurabh Paul discussed some really interesting results on from Meerkat. Now, what I am talking about is a slight variation on that, which is intensity mapping of metal lines, which means line emission from species which, such as carbon and oxygen instead of hydrogen. But the idea is otherwise the same. The idea is that you try to measure spatial fluctuations in the intensity of line emission across the sky instead of resolving individual sources. So this diagram gives a sort of illustration. What is shown here is a light cone from a simulation, which shows in the color the intensity of carbon 2 emission from galaxies in the simulation from redshift 6 to 10 in the top panel. Okay. So these are very high frequencies. This is 158 micron emission of singly ionized carbon. The units here are Janskis per steradian, and this is 160 co-moving megaparsec slice vertically. But the bottom panel is what an intensity mapping experiment will see. Okay, so the experiment will not see the finer details. The experiment will see only the large scale fluctuations in the intensity. And the idea is that even just this much information is useful. So first of all, the idea is, as Saurabh emphasized in his talk the other day, this is very appealing because it's much more economical to do than traditional galaxy surveys. So in terms of metal lines, the most important lines that are targeted here are the singly ionized carbon line of 158, 160 microns, various lines of the carbon monoxide molecule, and the Lyman alpha line. So Lyman alpha is strictly not metal line, but it is also one of the lines that are being aimed at for this kind of an idea. There are reasons why these three are particularly attractive alternatives, but you can also consider other lines like oxygen and so on. So there are several experiments currently in progress or currently in development trying to target this line intensity mapping. I have sort of taken this diagram which summarizes on the x-axis the redshift and on the y-axis the sky coverage of various experiments. So you can look at, for example, the redshifts corresponding to the epoch of reionization, redshifts above 5, say, and you will see that there are several experiments that fall in that range. So for example, for carbon 2, there are three experiments, TIME, Concerto, and CCAT-P. There is one experiment called COMAP, which aims to do the intensity mapping for carbon monoxide. And then finally, there is a space-based experiment called SphereX, which aims to do Lyman alpha intensity mapping at those redshifts. What I have done is I have overplotted on this diagram SKA low and low far to emphasize that almost all these experiments overlap with SKA and low far. So there is a lot of cross correlation work that could potentially be done between these 21 centimeter probes and these metal line intensity mapping probes. So what do these experiments aim to detect? The signal that they detect is kind of statistically similar to the 21 centimeter signal by definition. Here, what I have shown is the power spectrum of the line intensity of some metal line. And what we see is that, is there a, what we see is that at large scale, the line intensity power spectrum follows the matter power spectrum. And at the small scales, the line intensity power spectrum has the short noise contribution, which hides the matter power spectrum. So you can write this down symbolically in the form that I have in this equation below the diagram, where Pk, which is the power spectrum of the line intensity, is the PM, which is the matter power spectrum, multiplied by a bias squared. The bias incorporates the nonlinearities in the galaxies that produce these line emission, multiplied by the I square, the average line intensity, plus a short noise term P short. So the shape is very different from the 21 centimeter power spectrum that we expect from these redshifts. Okay. One can look at what the typical numbers by modeling. And the idea would be that to model this kind of line intensity signal, one has to now model the bias and the average intensity. So we have done recently some work on carbon 2 intensity mapping, where we postulated a very simple relation, which is written at the bottom of this slide, between the carbon 2 luminosity, line luminosity, and the star formation rate of a halo. And then we had a simulation where the star formation rates were sensible, meaning that the overall star formation rate density of the box was in agreement with cosmological measurements, as shown in the top panel of this figure. And this is then enough to predict a line intensity, average line intensity I from the previous slide. And this line intensity for C2 is shown between redshift 6 and 10 in Jansky's per steradians in the bottom panel. You see it's decreasing towards higher redshift as one might expect, and so on. And then one can predict these fluctuations in this line intensity. And we focused on one of the experiments, this Concerto experiment for this. It is set up on the Apex telescope in Chile. We considered 1500 hours on this for 2 square degrees between redshift 6 and 9 for a 0.5 arc minute resolution. And this is what we expect Concerto to see. This is the statistical version of that same diagram, where what you're seeing on the left-hand side column is the C2 power spectrum at redshift 6 in the top row, redshift 7 in the middle row, and redshift 8 in the bottom row. And I've split the power spectrum in each panel between the clustering and the short noise contributions. And the bottom line of this work is essentially that we expect Concerto to be able to detect the power spectrum, at least around redshift 6 at large scales, although the signal to noise is not expected to be particularly great. But this brings me to the point of synergy, because here is one of the first things that one can do using such intensity maps for 21 centimeter science. Because in the middle column, I have shown the predictions for the 21 centimeter power spectrum from this same simulation, some reionization history. We all know about this, how to read this plot. But then the right-hand side column shows the cross power spectrum between these two. And on the large scales, the cross power spectrum are shown in the orange lines because the cross power spectrum is negative, right? C2 is coming from the galaxies which lie in regions which are 21 centimeter dim. Um, so basically, we then have studied whether LOFAR and SKA can be cross correlated with experiment like Concerto. To measure this cross correlation, the forecast for that is not particularly great for Concerto, but we found that for a stage 2 experiment like CCAT-P, which is also in the works, which I showed in the diagram a couple slides ago, the detection should be possible all the way up to, in principle, 50 signal to noise of 50. After beyond that first advantage of looking at the cross correlation itself, what one can do using these intensity maps is fold them into any astrophysical inferences from 21 centimeter data. And we found that there are certain situations in which this can enable an improved inferences by breaking some degeneracies. This doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does happen. A simple example is shown here, where for a particular kind of data set, for a particular type of model, we found a degeneracy using LOFAR alone in the orange shaded region, a degeneracy between the mass of the ionizing sources and the brightness of the ionizing sources. But when we added the C2 21 centimeter cross correlation to the analysis, this degeneracy was removed. Okay. But then the third attraction is actually for me the most important feature or most important aspect of these metal line intensity maps of relevance to the audience in this conference, which is that this can actually help us in foreground removal in 21 centimeter. So this idea is really simple and nice, and it was actually suggested by an undergraduate student at UPenn 2-3 years ago in Bean et al. And the idea is as follows. So suppose you have a single line I, then the auto power spectrum, as I wrote down sometime before, the power spectrum of the intensity map of this line I is, let's denote it by PII, is just the Plin, which is the linear matter power spectrum, times the bias BI squared times the line intensity squared, II squared, right? Now suppose I have a second line, so say carbon, some carbon line, and I can do the intensity map of that. I can now write the cross power spectrum between I and J as Pij equal to Rij, Pij, which is equal to Plin, the linear matter power spectrum, times two bias terms, Bij and Bi and Bj, times two intensity terms, Ii and Ij, times the cross correlation coefficient Rij. Now, suppose I introduce a third line and do the intensity map of that line, then I can write Pik, Pjk, and so on, right? So then what these people showed is that I can then algebraically manipulate these three quantities and write the auto power spectrum of the line I. So in other words, PII in this form as shown on the bottom of that slide, where it is proportional to the product Pij, Pki divided by Pjk, and the proportionality constant is this combination of the Rijs. What is remarkable is that Bean et al. Showed that on large scales, this proportionality constant becomes 1. And this plot shows that. So what is showing here is that what is shown here is the 21 centimeter power spectrum from some simulation as a function of k at redshift 8.3. So the gray curve is the 21 centimeter power spectrum in the simulation predicted by the simulation, and various colored curves with the band is the recovered power spectrum by using this formula on the bottom of the screen. And you can see that on large scales, they agree almost perfectly. So this is an amazingly simple way of getting the 21 centimeter power spectrum using its cross correlations with intensity maps. So I feel that from a 21 centimeter point of view, metal line intensity maps are a really important way forward to look at the epoch of reionization. There are already 3 tentative detections of such intensity maps at redshift 3, and a lot of work is happening, as we saw, at higher redshift. So I'm already on the 14th minute. So let me move on to the second point of my review, which is the Lyman alpha forest. So the Lyman alpha forest idea is really simple. You try to find a very bright object, most often a quasar, at a cosmological distance, and you take its spectrum from here on Earth, and the spectrum of this object passes through the intervening material, and if there is any neutral hydrogen, it will leave Lyman alpha absorption lines in the spectrum. So the spectrum then these absorption lines are called the Lyman alpha forest, and this forest will then be a function of the cosmological density structure and gas physics. The Lyman alpha forest looks like the diagram on the bottom right panel, where I have shown two quasars, one at redshift 0.16 in the top panel and the other at redshift 3.62 in the bottom panel. And you can see that relative to the top panel, you can see that there is a thick network or forest-like network of absorption lines in the bottom quasar, which suggests that this is the Lyman alpha absorption of intervening hydrogen, neutral hydrogen towards the sight line, towards this quasar. So now clearly this is actually the best way of probing the intergalactic medium that we know of. This probe is really mature, has been used by many observations and so on. But the question is whether this can probe the epoch of reionization. The first thing you would need for that is quasars at those redshifts, quasars in the reionization redshifts at redshifts say greater than 6. And hundreds of such quasars are known by now. But it was thought that Lyman alpha forest is useless, even if you have these quasars, for probing reionization. And the reason is, even if you have very tiny amount of neutral hydrogen at 10 to the minus 4, which is definitely not neutral IgM, the Lyman alpha cross section is so big that the opacity is 1 and your spectrum is gone. You don't see anything to do astronomy. So Lyman alpha forest was thought to be useless for probing the epoch of reionization, but recently we found that that's not true. There is another way in which the forest does turn out to be very useful, namely, instead of looking at the Lyman alpha absorption strength itself, one looks at the spatial scatter in the Lyman alpha absorption strength on the sky. And it turns out that that scatter is a probe of reionization. Not only is it a probe of reionization, it's an extraordinarily strong probe of reionization is what we found. This is shown in this diagram, where on the left panel, the smaller panel, what I have shown is the points show various measurements of the Lyman alpha absorption strength. This is called tau effective as a function of redshift between 5 and 6. And on the right panel, what is shown is the cumulative distribution functions or histograms of these tau effective values. And you see that the distribution functions are very flat, which means that there is a very large scatter on the sky from quasar to quasar. Various models failed to explain these fluctuations. And what we found a couple of years ago is that we were able to explain these fluctuations. The blue curves on the diagram are our model. And we were able to do this simply by delaying reionization to redshift 5. So usual folklore was that reionization ends at 6. We delayed it by a significant time, and that delay turned out to be crucial for matching with this Lyman alpha data. This is how the simulation or this model looks like. What is shown on the top light cone is the neutral hydrogen evolution. The middle light cone shows the hydrogen photoionization rate evolution, and the bottom light cone shows the temperature evolution. Now, the point I want to convey here is that this is a constraint from the Lyman alpha forest scatter. And what we are finding increasingly in several papers since this paper is that this turns out to be a concordant reionization model. It now explains a lot of other things about reionization that we know of all in one shot. And it's very tightly constrained. There is very little wiggle room. There's very little that you can change on this slide. I'm not going to talk too much about the Lyman alpha forest because we will have a very nice talk by Prakash Gaikwad after these presentations, and he will take us. I'll make just two brief points about the synergy again between Lyman alpha forest and 21 centimeter. So the first thing that we learn here is that now that Lyman alpha forest does constrain the reionization, it makes predictions. And these predictions are rather robust actually. And what is shown here on the left panel is the power spectrum of the ionized hydrogen distribution at redshifts less than 6. So frequencies greater than 200 megahertz for 21 centimeter line. And what is shown in the solid blue line in this panel is our expected power spectrum. And the dashed line is what we expected in the traditional models of reionization. So you see that there is an order of magnitude extra power which is being predicted by the Lyman alpha forest. Similarly, this then reflects into the 21 centimeter intensity power spectrum, which is shown on the right-hand side. I won't go again into the details of this. Janaki Raste is going to give a talk about this in another hour or so. But what I will talk about is an aspect which I haven't heard discussed in this conference so far, which is that these laminal forest opaque regions now predict a beautiful 21 centimeter forest signal. Okay, and luckily about 10 radio bright sources are now available at around redshift 6. So we went ahead and predicted the 21 centimeter forest that you will see. Unfortunately, the 21 centimeter forest depends on the properties of the neutral regions, which the laminal forest doesn't probe. So we don't know that. We quantify the thermal state of this neutral region with an X-ray background intensity. And for 3 different values of that X-ray background intensity, these are our predictions. So the main thing to take away from this slide is that we feel that uh, these should be detectable with SKA. And if they are not, that null detection with just 10 sources will constrain X-ray background and thermal history in neutral region. So that is synergy, right? That would be fantastic to combine Lyman alpha forest and 21 centimeter and really understand the X-ray background at these high redshift. There are hundreds of sources I was told are expected from LOFAR, the TGSs and Gleam surveys at these redshifts. So that would be good. So that's about the Lyman alpha. Let me now quickly discuss the CMB, the third non-21 centimeter probe of reionization that I wanted to discuss. Now, all of us probably know that the CMB measures this average opacity of Thomson scattering to the last scattering surface due to the free electron production during reionization, right? That produces an integral constraint on the epoch of reionization. But now these free electrons are spatially inhomogeneously distributed, of course, because we know that the reionization is patchy. And so what we find is something like what is shown on the left-hand side here, which is the power spectrum of the free electron fraction as a function of K. There are many curves here. I apologize for a crowded plot, but you don't have to pay too much attention on the difference. These are all various models. The point to take from this is that during the epoch of reionization, there is a non-trivial power spectrum to the distribution of free electrons. Therefore, because the Thomson scattering opacity is just the electron density times the Thomson scattering cross section line integrated form, we will therefore see a scatter in the Thomson scattering opacity across the sky. And the power spectrum of that for various models is shown in the right hand panel. Again, the numbers are not important for today's discussion. The point is to appreciate that such power will exist in Thomson tau. Not just the tau, if you multiply the sigma by kBt, you get something called the free electron temperature, the electron pressure, the pressure of the free electron inside the ionized bubbles. The CMB community usually denotes this as Y. It's called the Compton Y, and this can be measured by the thermal Sunyaev-Zeldovich distortions on the CMB spectrum. Now, what is shown in this figure is predictions for this Y in one of our reionization simulations at redshift 5.7 on the left-hand side and redshift 7.3 on the right-hand side. And you can see that as reionization progresses from redshift 7 to 5, the CMB-Y is changing. And you can also see that the CMB-Y has a non-trivial spatial distribution. What this means is that potentially one can now probe reionization using CMB alone. And the first such attempt has been done earlier this year. This is the first ever measurement of the Y tau cross correlation from CMB. So no non-CMB data has gone into this. This is a cross correlation measurement from the Planck data. What is shown on the y-axis here is the tau y cross correlation as a function of L. Various colored points are points when various assumptions are varied. And what you can see is that this is actually effect of reionization. Now, this result is very low significance. It is actually consistent with 0 at the moment. But what was really remarkable about this paper by Namikawa et al. Earlier this year is that they were able to actually constrain an albeit crude reionization model. So on the right-hand side panel is their constraints on reionization parameters for a very simplistic reionization model using this Y tau cross correlation measurement. I won't have time to go through the details, but just look at this, this TB panel, log TB panel, which describes the temperature of the gas within ionized regions. And so you now have a CMB only limit of 10 to the 5 Kelvin, a few times 10 to the 5 Kelvin, an upper limit on the gas temperature. And these authors believe that things are quite encouraging on this, because on the left-hand side diagram on this slide, they show the forecasts for such constraints for upcoming CMB experiments like CMB S4, and it looks like they expect that things will improve quite significantly. But what is to be appreciated is that this is amazingly complementary. You are now detecting the ionized bubbles instead of the neutral regions that you detect in 21 centimeters.
Girish, 5 minutes.
Yes, thanks, Shiv. Which now brings me to the last point that I want to discuss, which is high redshift galaxy surveys. Now, high redshift galaxy surveys is actually the most traditional, the simple-minded astronomers' technique of probing epoch of reionization. But somehow in 21 centimeter community, we don't talk much about these surveys. So I thought I'll make a few remarks about it. Now, the goal of high redshift surveys is to just find galaxies in the epoch of reionization. And one simple way of finding this also points to the first way that they can be synergistic to 21 centimeter, and that is by discovering galaxies using their Lyman alpha emission lines. So when galaxies at high redshifts are detected or identified using their Lyman alpha emission lines, they are called Lyman alpha emitters, or LAEs. And LAEs are really easy to detect, okay, it turns out. But what is remarkable for us 21 centimeter people is that the LAE visibility on the sky is affected by the IgM ionization structure along with the galaxy property itself. So it's an amazing probe of the IgM simply because of the technique of discovering those galaxies. So there is excellent data on LAEs available out to Redshift 7 due to a very nice project called Silver Rush by the Japanese community on their Subaru telescope using the HSC instrument. But there is amazing data expected from the Subaru PFS and the HEDDEX projects soon. The first way in which these high redshift galaxy surveys help us is by cross correlation. So the idea is again same as the metal line intensity mapping discussion. And I illustrate this using this diagram from one of our papers, where the color code now shows the 21 centimeter brightness from some high redshift, and the white circle shows our predicted locations for Lyman alpha emitters for certain experimental assumptions. And you can see that, of course, the Lyman alpha emitters are galaxies. They only lie in the ionized bubbles. So they are going to anti-correlate with the 21 centimeter brightness. This is the prediction for that anti-correlation at 4 different redshift, 5.7 to 7.4. The redshift numbers are odd because only at these narrowband redshifts Lyman alpha emitters are available. But the point to note here is that if you have sort of SKA and you cross-correlate it with PFS, you can get an overall 5 signal to noise ratio detection of this cross-correlation. Again, would be an evidence for a cosmological origin of any putative 21 centimeter discovery from SKA. PFS HERA is also very encouraging. Moving on, these high redshift survey not only point out objects such as LAs, they actually hopefully detect galaxies which all of us assume reionize the universe. Okay, and amazingly, these galaxies are now known out to redshift 11. So the left-hand side panel shows these discoveries. This is mostly thanks to Hubble and Spitzer space telescopes. They are detected using a very simple photometric technique, which enables the physics and makes this feasible. Basically, what is shown is the star formation rate density, and you can see that there are data points now deep into the reionization epoch. We said that reionization ends at 5, and you have points here all the way up to 10. What's not appreciated all the time is that now consider a galaxy at redshift 10 seen by these surveys. What that means is that the stars that you are seeing in this galaxy were produced at a much higher redshift. So you are actually being able to constrain not only the star formation at redshift 10, but potentially also star formation at higher redshift. And this is done on the right-hand side panel for 6 different galaxies by this London group. So there are 6 objects. Their names are written in these colored letters. That's not important, but what is shown in these curves is the stellar population evolution predicted for each of these objects. Each of these objects are seen at redshift 9, but you can see that their stellar population have to have developed over all the way to out to redshift 20 in order for this object to have the properties that we see it to have at redshift 9. And the gray blocks here are James Webb Space Telescope bands. In other words, James Webb Space Telescopes will actually see these objects at these redshifts in just the next couple of years. Okay, this is a direct constraint on this n dot number that we all try to infer from 21 centimeter surveys. Okay, in fact, EDGES makes already falsifiable predictions on these galaxies. I don't have time to go into great details, but what is shown here is the luminosity functions of these objects. The angular gray curve shows various surveys from James Webb and WFIRST space telescopes. And what this nice paper by Miroka and Furlaneto said was that these telescopes should be able to verify if the galaxies that produce the edges signal already exist at those redshifts or not. Similar story about quasars. If quasars exist, the 21 centimeter signal is very different than the galaxy dominated case, even for the same reionization history. So a prior on quasars is important. The current data disfavors quasars. We just finished a 5-year project trying to come to this conclusion. This plot shows the evolution of the hydrogen photoionization rate as a function of redshift. The data points are measurements, and the colored bands are what the quasar data tell us, and there is a big shortfall. But what we also learned in this project is that the data are of rather poor quality. What will happen, however, is that LSST, WFIRST, and Euclid will push this data out to Redshift 9 very soon in the next 5 years or so, and then we will have extremely good observations, very important for 21 centimeter inference. Just the last comment, which is that just the existence of galaxies and quasars, of course, is not enough. They need to be able to contribute to reionization. This n dot is a product of escape fraction and then some galaxy related quantity. So what is the situation with escape fraction? This is another probe of reionization. So now there is an increased activity towards measuring this. There are some first measurements of AGN escape fractions in the last few years. Redshift less than 4, a lot of galaxy escape fractions are measured. They scatter all the way from 0 to 80%. The average is around 30%. What I wanted to point out to this community is that at around Redshift 6, the first escape fraction constraints have recently come with a correlation between galaxies and Lyman alpha transmission spikes in the Lyman alpha forest. It's a really nice idea, and it has given escape fraction of 15 to 20%, which it seems like is all that we reionization modelers need. I'll also quickly point out that a totally new galaxy population has been discovered at high redshifts by Dan Stark and others. These galaxies are really strange. They have spectra like quasars, but they are not quasars. They have very hard spectra. But for us, what is important is that the existence of these galaxies suggests that these galaxies should be able to reionize the universe quite easily. Okay, I'm 2 minutes over time. Sorry for that. So I'll end. What I wanted to point out, and I hope I've made that point, is basically that there are several reionization probes which are complementary to the 21 centimeter signal. It requires quite a bit of work to exploit the synergy between them and 21 centimeter. There is a lot of theoretical and experimental work happening on those non-21 centimeter probes. And I think at this stage, the main advantage of these would be mitigation of 21 centimeter foregrounds, but eventually they should also help in inference. And I think I'll stop here.
Thanks, Girish. So, questions? Okay, I will.
Hello.
Kanan and Girish.
Kanan, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Girish. So, just wanted to know whether these Lyman alpha emitters at Redshift 7, these data are public in public domain, or it is not public yet?
I think that's I'll have to double check. My feeling is that it is public though. So as a reference, this Uchi et al. Paper will say this, but as far as I can remember, it is public. Analyzing it is very hard, but it is public, I think. But one would have to check this.
Okay. Okay.
The luminosity functions and clustering measurements are all public. The object catalog might not be public, or luminosity functions and these things, clustering is all public.
Okay. Thank you.
Listen.
Hi, Girish. So these high redshift galaxies where they have some estimate of the age of the stars they're observing.
Yeah.
So how do they put in? I mean, there can be environmental evolution of the way we estimate the stars stellar ages at z equals to 0 may not apply. So how do they put that in?
No, No, so the way this is done is by population synthesis, and they have colors of these galaxies in various bands. And once you have colors and the ability to predict, so population synthesis codes can take in an IMF and predict the colors. So you can reverse that argument and predict the evolution of the star populations. Given the colors of a galaxy, there are
Yeah,
a
but
number
the
of clues
reddening,
that can produce stars.
the reddening can be different in, I mean, at z equals to 0 and very high with z, but that
Yeah.
that will not come from the population synthesis model, but probably that they will put in some other
No,
way
there
to.
are the reddening is part of population synthesis actually. So these people have
Acha, okay,
constraints
okay,
from
okay.
Spitzer on reddening, and then that breaks the
Okay.
degeneracy between reddening and stellar ages and masses.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
okay.
an important point actually, reddening. So it is accounted.
Okay. The other question I had is that you mentioned at some point that the H1 forest and the Lyman alpha, the H1 and the Lyman alpha, which gives the forest, may not be at the same place in the post-ionization. But why is that? I mean, I will expect the H1 also to be at the denser part, surviving mostly.
Oh, no. So the H1 forest will come. The H1 absorption will mostly come in neutral from neutral islands, right? Neutral regions.
Right.
And the Lyman alpha forest absorption is mostly coming from tiny amount of neutral hydrogen within ionized regions. So that was what I was trying to say, right? So the
Yeah.
21 centimeter line is
Okay.
very weak and it will not be visible in ionized regions. Even yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just like for the galaxies, the ionized regions kind of shield the hydrogen, and that's why they survive, right? So that's why I was.
No, this is not that, Prasoon. So this is regions where the ionization radiation hasn't reached yet. No, so these are voids
Okay.
actually.
Okay. 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 Okay.
There are no galaxies in that, and radiation from other galaxies hasn't arrived in that region yet.
Okay.
Desh,
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned the Lyman alpha forest and the scatter in the absorptions that you see. How do you actually translate that information into useful things? I mean, what is it, 2-point correlation function, or what? How is the scatter translated? How is it parameterized?
So at the moment, it is being parameterized by the distribution function of the scatter. So if you will, all n-point correlation function, but we just look at the distribution function. In our work, we looked at the cumulative distribution function of the opacity values of the Lyman alpha forest, and we required the model to produce that, right? The cosmological model was required to produce that whole distribution.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
so I don't see any further questions.
Steve, I have a question. Can I ask?
Go on, please.
So Girish, nice and informative talk. So my question is about the defined lines, metal lines. So as you have shown that all the power spectrum of those lines follow the dark matter power spectrum at large scale, right?
Yeah.
So how one can distinguish between different astrophysics of these lines on those scales?
Oh, so when I say follow, it's not well. There were these two proportionality constants, right? The bias and the intensity, and that's where the astrophysics enters.
All right. And so you have also mentioned many experiment is going on. Can they produce tomographic images of those things, or they are all statistical?
They do they do promise to produce images.
Okay.
So both Concerto and CCAT-T, and I don't know much about the third time, but both of these do have. They will try to get an image. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All
Shiv,
right.
I have a question.
Go on. Last question.
Yeah, so Girish, is the abundance of metal lines sufficient at redshifts greater than 6 in order to perform any statistical study in itself, like just like we perform with 21 centimeter?
Yeah, so we don't know, right? Because we don't have an observation of metal lines at those redshifts. We do have sporadic few galaxies which are for which C2, for example, is seen in ALMA data and so on. What we have learned from those and what we have learned from C2 sources is what we have folded into the predictions that I made. So in other words, if I just extrapolate naively what I know from lower redshifts to these epochs, I should get, the prediction is yes, there should be enough to be able to detect something out to redshift 8. But yeah, we don't know yet. That's the reason we want to do the experiment, I guess, right?
So I guess we can move on now. Run out of time. So thanks a lot, Girish. And let's move on to Prakash's talk. So Prakash, you can start now.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for giving me opportunity to talk about our main, one of our main results. So today I'm going to talk about the thermal state of the intergalactic media near the tail end of reionization, above redshift 5 or so. These are the collaborators. So they are mostly from India, US, and Europe. So here is a brief outline of my talk. So here I'm making the talk in slightly different way. First of all, I'll give you the introduction or motivation. Why do we want to measure the thermal state? Then after the introduction, I'll straight away say what are the main results and how we obtain these main results using the observation, simulation, and the statistics of transmission spikes that I will explain in the next few slides. And finally, I'll give you some additional results in our work. And finally, I'll just summarize the talk. So we know that reionization is one of the main major phase transition in the universe. And reionization is a two-step process. In the first step, hydrogen and helium reionize mostly by star-forming galaxies, which is happen around redshift between 6 and 20. And in the second step, helium-2 is reionized, which happen around redshift between 2 and 4, mostly by quasars or so. And as Girish nicely explained, that the reionization is expected to be extended process and patchy process. Now, one of the main effect of the reionization is, of course, to change the ionization state of the IgM, but is also important that it photoheats the intergalactic medium. So the photoheating of the IgM is also accompanied by this ionization of the hydrogen and helium. So this photoheating of the IgM actually changes the thermal state of the intergalactic medium. So if we somehow measure this thermal state of the intergalactic medium, we can constrain the timing and nature of reionization. So the question is, how do we characterize this thermal state of the IgM? When we perform the numerical simulations of low density intergalactic medium, what we find is that the temperature and density are very well correlated by power law. And this is for uniform UV background. So there are no fluctuations if there are no fluctuations. Now, this power law temperature density relation at over densities less than 10 or so is characterized by two parameters. One is called the slope of the temperature density relation gamma, and the other is a normalization of the temperature density relation T0. What it means is the temperature of the intergalactic medium if the IgM is at cosmic mean density. So when we say we want to constrain the thermal state of the IgM, what we mean is we want to measure the evolution of this normalization T0 and the slope of the temperature density relation gamma as a function of redshift. So here in this right-hand panel, what I'm showing is the evolution of T0 and evolution of gamma as a function of redshift from different literature that we have. Now, one of the strongest probe to measure this thermal state of the intergalactic medium is a Lyman alpha forest, because it is very sensitive to the underdense regions or mildly overdense regions like delta is equal to 10 or so. So the question is, if we somehow measure this thermal parameters as a function of redshift, how does it give an information about the reionization? So here is we are showing two curves. One is this blue curve, which corresponds to a very late reionization model, and this red curve, which corresponds to a very early reionization model like Hart and Maddow 2012. Now, what you see over here is that there is a difference in the temperature at redshift of 6 or so, or between redshift 5 and 6 or so. What happens here, if the reionization is very early, there is enough time for the gas to cool down, as a result of which the temperature in the early reionization model is expected to be smaller. Similarly, you would expect the gamma to be flattened when you have a late reionization model. As mentioned by Girish, this late reionization model, like this blue curve, is actually can reproduce the scatter in the effective optical depth. That's what he mentioned very nicely in his Lyman alpha forest section. So our aim in this work was to measure the T naught and gamma between redshift range 5.3 to 5.9. And the way we do it by comparing laminar alpha forest properties from simulations with that from observations. And here I'm going to tell you the main results of our work, which is the most important part of the talk. So when we measure the, here are our measurements. So these are the T naught and gamma measurements from our work. So these red points are from our measurements, which I will describe how we do the measurements. The uncertainties over here are both modeling as well as observational uncertainties, and we have accounted for all of them. And as you can see, the main result of this talk is that our T naught and gamma measurements favor late reionization model, which is consistent with what Girish has shown earlier. Now I will tell you how we obtain these results, which is the next part of the talk. So here, I'm going to talk about the method that we use to measure these thermal parameters. So the idea is very simple. You take the laminar alpha forest from observations. You take the laminar alpha forest from simulations. We vary these thermal parameters as 3 parameters. And then you derive some kind of statistics, laminar alpha forest statistics, which is sensitive to these thermal parameters, and do the chi-square minimization. And the best fit value will correspond to chi-square minimum, and the uncertainty will be just, this will be a statistical uncertainty, but we have to account for systematic uncertainty also. So the first challenge in this work was to get the data for the laminar alpha forest observations. Now here I'm showing you a plot of laminar alpha forest at different redshifts. This is at redshift 0.4, this is at redshift 3, and this is at redshift 6. The laminar alpha forest that we are going to work with would be something like this. So the transmitted laminar alpha flux is almost completely absorbed at redshift greater than 6. However, we see that there are occurrences of these transmission spikes, and these are the transmission spikes that we use to measure the thermal parameters T naught and gamma. Now, there are 3 main challenges when we do such observations. The first challenge is the number of spectra, the number of quasars at redshift greater than 6 are limited to take the spectra, high quality spectra. And why this happens is because the quasar luminosity function drops rather very quickly. The second thing is we also need these quasars to be bright because we want a sufficiently high signal to noise to make the measurements. So this is another challenge. The other challenge is we need a very high resolution spectra, because if you consider the temperature of the intergalactic medium, the ionized regions is around 10⁴ Kelvin, 10,000 Kelvin, which corresponds to a B parameter of 12.8 kilometers per second. So if we have a very poor quality spectra, we will not be able to detect any temperature measurements. So here we have to use a very high resolution spectra like MIC or HIRIS to get a resolution of 6 kilometers per second. So here we have observed 5 different quasar sightlines in our sample. You can see that for all these quasars, the emission redshift is above redshift 6. The integration time is really large because the signal to noise, the brightness of these quasars was limited. And the signal to noise that we obtain is really large because of this integration time. And the third thing is these instruments are actually taken from very high resolution spectra. So here you can see that there are examples of transmission spikes that we detect in all these spectra at all redshift up to 6 or so. So I talked about the laminar alpha forest from observations. Now let me talk about the laminar alpha forest simulations from simulations. How do we simulate laminar alpha forest? So we have analyzed the transmission spikes, the spectra, from 25 different simulations. This simulation comes in variety of boxes. So this starts from 10 H inverse megaparsecs to all the way up to 160 H inverse megaparsec. The number of particles varies, 512 to 2048 cube. We use Gadget 3, smooth particle hydrodynamic simulation, Planck lambda CDM cosmology, flat. We have a hydrogen and helium reionization, but there are no feedbacks. So this is suitable for only laminar alpha forest. For the purpose of this talk, I will just focus on this box, which is a 40 H inverse 2048 cube, which is optimum for both convergence and resolution. And also it can capture the fluctuations in UV background so that its size is sufficiently large enough. In this simulation, there are 7 simulations in this category, but I will explain only 4 of them. 3 of them are optically thin simulations. That means there are no fluctuations in the UV background model. And there is one simulation which Girish has talked about, is a radiative transfer simulations, where we capture the fluctuations in the photoionization rate. And also here there is a fluctuations in the neutral hydrogen because of these fluctuations. Now, what is the difference for these 3 optically thin simulations? These 3 optically thin simulations have a different temperature density relation. For example, I will just call these models as a cold, default, and hot. Hot model has a temperature T0 of 14,000 Kelvin. This is 10,000 Kelvin. This is 7,000 Kelvin. Yeah. So I talked about the laminar alpha forest from simulations now. Let me talk about what is the statistics, what is the property of the transmission spike that is sensitive to the thermal parameters, T0 and gamma. So here in this figure, what I'm showing in the A panel, panel A1 is observed spectra, transmission spike, a portion of the spectrum. In the middle panel, it's a cold model, and in the right-hand side, it's a hot model. The first point here I want to make is that the simulated spectra that we have are actually mimicked to match the observations. That means if there is a noise here, we have a noise here, and so on and so forth. The second important point here is that the width of this transmission spikes is actually much more in the hot model as compared to cold model. So these are a blending of the lines happens because of the temperature effect. So if we somehow characterize the width of the transmission spike, we can measure the temperature as well as the gamma, the slope of the temperature and density relation. So to characterize this shape of the spikes, what we do is we fit 1 minus f, the flux, with a multi-component void profile. There is no physical motivation for this. This is a heuristic approach. Why we are doing it is because it's simple, efficient, and convenient. You can also do it with a Gaussian. That should not be a problem. But just the only thing is that you have to do the same thing in simulations as well as observations while comparing the distribution functions. We did this because this 1 minus f looks very similar to the low redshift laminar alpha forest, and we have already developed a machinery for how to analyze the low redshift laminar alpha forest. So here is a fitted, each component is fitted with 3 parameters. And this is shown by this red curve, and this is a residual between the fit and the input spectrum. Now for each void profile, there are 3 free parameters that we have to fit. One is the height of the spikes. The second one is the width of the spike, and the third one is the location of the spike, transmission spike. Now, height of the spike actually tells us something about how much deficient is the neutral hydrogen, how less is the neutral hydrogen in that region. Width of the spike, as I mentioned earlier, is related to the temperature, and location of the spike is, I'll just talk about what is this. So for each of these 3 parameters, thanks. So for each of this transmission spike, we can derive 3 parameters, 3 functions, which is a pseudo column density distribution, spike width distribution, and location of the spike. And these are sensitive to different parameters, different astrophysical properties. For example, this is sensitive to the ionization state, this is temperature, and this is fluctuations in the density field. So now I'll talk about the results, main results. So this is a spike width distribution function at 3 different redshift bands. From observation. This is a cold model. We do not fit the cold model very well. We have a hot model. Hot model fits very well here, but it slightly over predicts. And this is a default model where we fit at every other redshift range. Now, in order to do the to constrain the parameters, what we do is we impose the power law temperature density relation from the density field by varying T0 and gamma in the post-processing state, calculate laminar alpha transmitted flux, fit spikes, compute spike statistics. And here are the constraints, the T0 and gamma constraints, one sigma constraints from this one. So here was the plot that, as I mentioned, the evolution of T0 and gamma before our measurement. These are the measurements after our study. And here we account for the continuum fitting uncertainty as well as uncertainty to gene smoothing. And as I mentioned earlier, this T0 and gamma is consistent with late reionization model, like Pupin et al. 2019 or so. So here in Pupin et al. 2019, the reionization starts at 15.0 and ends at redshift 6.2, the very late ending reionization model. But as I mentioned earlier, there is also another model where we have a radiative transfer. There are fluctuations in the ionizing background. So the question is, what happens when we have fluctuations in the temperature density relation? So due to the radiative effect of the fluctuations in the ionizing background, we also have the fluctuations in the temperature and density relation. So unlike uniform UV background model, we cannot characterize it by just one single power law. What happens if whether the spike width distribution from such a model, whether it reproduces the spike width distribution or not, that's the main question. So here is again observation. And this is a patchy model. And you can see that it's also actually very much good agreement with the observations. So the question is, what does this, when we measure anything from real data, a realistic temperature density relation will have fluctuations. But when we apply a power law temperature density relation, what are we actually measuring? So what we actually measure is a median temperature density relation using the uniform UV background models. And this is shown over here. So this is a scatter in the temperature density relation from this very nice, which self-consistent UV background model fluctuations. And you can see that this is a scatter in the temperature density relation, and this is a median temperature density relation. And median temperature density relation is actually very much in agreement with the measurements. Now, this is the last slide of my talk. So here, I just want to make to tell you that the measurements that we done was for hydrogen reionization, but recently we have also done the measurements for helium reionization. So these are from a very high resolution, 103 quasar absorption spectra. And here you can see clearly the effect of reionization, the helium reionization on the IgM. So you can see that there is a rise in temperature, and it's because there is a helium-2 reionization heating, photoheating of the gas. And the most important point over here is that here as well, the reionization, the model is the late reionization model, like Pukven et al. 2019, is actually favoring the data. So both hydrogen as well as helium-2 reionization are late at least from the temperature measurements that we have done so far. So this is a last slide. So this is a summary. So there are 3 main points that I want you to take. The first is we have done the analysis of 5 quasar high resolution, high signal to noise ratio spectra. We have analyzed the spikes in 25 different simulations. And the main result is that both hydrogen as well as helium reionization is late in the model. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Prakash. So now it's open to questions. Questions, please. I don't see. Okay. Teeth.
Yeah, Prakash, this is about the part where you said what happens when realistic UV fluctuation model is taken and what the T naught gamma means.
Yes.
So towards the end.
Yes.
So suppose I want to understand what T naught means. Would it be still that I take points of like unit over density?
Mm-hmm.
There will be a lot of values of temperature there. The median value there will be this T naught you measure. Is that what you are saying?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So
and similarly, you can do gamma.
Yeah, exactly. So what you can do is you can just take the bins in the density and ask the question, how much is the scatter in the temperature? And you can just fit a power law to that scatter. That's what I mean by median temperature density relation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Shiv, can I
Any
ask
further
one
questions? More? Sure, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thanks. Prakash, the other thing is when you are saying that your the temperature measurements are not consistent with the early reionization model, won't there be degeneracies with, for example, the spectra of the sources which ionize the universe? Can't I have a hard spectra sources ionizing earlier so that the temperature during reionization went very high? And they cool, of course, but by the time they cool, they end up at T naught values near where you are. So it is still earlier than your late reionization model, but ionized with a very high temperature.
Yes, but the main thing is the cooling is happening due to the Hubble expansion, right?
Correct.
I mean, I cannot have an arbitrarily high value of at any redshift. I cannot do the ionization very high because Hubble expansion will take care after that, and there is a very particular range of temperature and density and the redshift at which I can have such a high value of temperature after the reionization, right?
No, but I can move the reionization temperature at earlier redshifts. Just increase the temperature there. Yeah, it will cool. All models will cool, but it will cool to a higher temperature. So I can afford some higher redshifts. And what I'm saying is there is a degeneracy there.
But then you also have to ask a question whether this is matching with the effective, I mean, the scatter in the effective optical depth or not, the model.
Yeah, that is a different question. I'm talking about just the T naught measurement.
Yeah, just T naught gamma will not tell you, but you also have to complement by that effective optical depth scatter. Here we try to do that match because Girish has already shown in his paper that the effective optical depth scatter matches for this model.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. The T naught gamma cannot just tell whether it's an early or late reionization model. Yes.
One last question we can accommodate. If there are no questions, then we can move on. Let's thank Prakash again. And Suman has to make an announcement. So Suman, please go ahead and make the announcement before Janaki starts.
Hi everyone. So there are a couple of announcements that I would like to make. So first of all, we have shared one document with all of you, which where you can post your suggestions and your thoughts about this workshop, and that will be discussed in tomorrow's dedicated discussion session. So if you are not able to edit or write your comments, please let us know. We will make sure that it's working properly. And okay, and second thing is that there will be a screenshot photo session today at 3:20. So please make sure that you are there, and the videos and slides are already uploaded for till yesterday. So if you have missed something, please go ahead and take a look. Yeah, so these are the announcements I had to make. Now over to you, Shiv.
Okay, Janaki, you can load your slides now. You already have done that. Okay, so please go on, start.
Hello. Thanks a lot, Shiv, and thanks a lot, organizers, for giving me this opportunity to speak here today. So, I'm Janki Raste, and I am a postdoc at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. I'm working with Girish Kulkarni, and this work was done in collaboration with all these people. So today I'm going to speak on the implications of Redshift 5 Lyman alpha forest on the observational prospects of the 21 centimeter power spectrum from the epoch of reionization. So this was the brief outline of my talk. That first, I was going to talk about the Lyman alpha forest spectra from the distant quasars. However, this has been already discussed in detail by Prakash and Girish, so I can just skip that very quickly. Then I'll talk about the late reionization model given by Kulkarni et al. In 2019. And I'll talk about the 21 centimeter signal, which is predicted by this late reionization model. Then finally, I'll talk about the observational prospects of this 21 centimeter signal at very low redshift towards the end of the reionization between redshift 5.4 and redshift 6. So this is a brief cartoon of how the Lyman alpha forest works. However, since it has been already discussed, I can move on. So one of the interesting things predicted by Lyman alpha forest in recent years, which was predicted by this, observed by this Becker et al. And Bozeman et al. In 2018, was that Lyman alpha effective optical depth, which is basically just a measure of what is spectra which is absorbed over the unabsorbed continuum spectra. So we see that there is large effect scatter in the effective optical depth, which means that there are large fluctuations in the ionization ionization states, basically neutral hydrogen at these redshifts. And Kulkarni et al. In 2019 calibrated their model of the reionizations to match with these predictions, with these observations of Lyman alpha forest spectra effective optical depth observations. And they basically, what they have predicted is that the reionization is late and it's patchy. So it looks something like this. This is a light cone in which it starts from redshift 8 to redshift 5. This is ionization light cone. The blue regions are neutral regions and the orange ones are the ionized regions. So at higher redshifts, we have expected the ionized regions. But the interesting feature is that even at redshift as low as 5.5, there are large neutral regions which then which are able to explain this large scatter in the effective optical depth. But they also will have effect on the 21 centimeter signal. So in brief, this reionization model predicts that the midpoint of reionization will be around redshift 7, and that it will end at around redshift 5.3. This is also seems to be in agreement with other observational constraints from other probes, which most of them come from quasar observations. And for contrast, in this work, we have also analyzed early reionization model. So for that, we have chosen Hart and Maddow model from 2012, which predicts the end of reionization by 6.7. This is a very early reionization model. but we are just using it for contrast. Also, for the sake of completeness, we note that recent observations of CMB reionization optical depth also predicts a late end of the reionization, and the Kulkarni et al. 2019 model agrees with the latest Planck observations, whereas an early reionization model would not. So what are the implications for the 21 centimeter signal? Now, I don't think I need to go into detail of the 21 centimeter physics, but in basically that it is just distortion of the CMB photons by presence of neutral hydrogen, and its amplitude is very small. It also has special fluctuations based on ionization, density, spin temperature, and peculiar velocity. So in this work, we have ignored this fluctuations because of spin temperature, and we have assumed that at redshift less than 10, spin temperature is going to be much higher than CMB temperature, which means that there will be perfect coupling due to Lyman alpha, and that there is heating, and the spin temperature, I mean the kinetic temperature of the gas has been heated to much larger than CMB temperature. Now this might not be a very valid assumption at redshifts around 10, because there is a lot of unknown quantities, but because our work is mostly focused at lower redshift, around redshift between redshift 5 and 6, this is a very good assumption. Also, because we are going to be analyzing the power spectra, if it turns out that this is not a valid assumption, if there are going to be fluctuations because of spin temperature, though it's not likely, but if there are, then that will only add to the fluctuations and add to the power. So our predictions are conservative predictions. Okay, so this is the light cone of brightness temperature, again from redshift 8 to redshift 5, and this is in linear. So given the large neutral regions which we observed in the simulations in the ionization light cone, we also have similar large regions of non-zero brightness temperature, which will add to the fluctuations, and at redshift as low as 5.5, and which means that the power in 21 centimeter signal at this redshift is going to be large, at least larger than previously expected. So our power spectrum throughout this work, I'm going to be just talking about the dimensionless power spectrum. This is the power spectrum at redshift 9. So the dashed line corresponds to the early reionization model, and the solid line is for the late reionization model given by Kulkarni et al. So here we see that at redshift 9, their order of magnitude is almost comparable, almost the same, and only the shape is different because at lower redshift, the early reionization model has progressed further, which means the ionized regions are larger, which means there is more power at low K modes compared to the late reionization model. However, comparing the same thing at lower redshift, around redshift 5.6, we see that there is an orders of magnitude enhancement in the power for the late reionization model. And the only power which comes in the early reionization model is mostly because of the density fluctuations, because the ionization fluctuations are almost negligible. So given that we have large power, or at least larger than previously expected power in 21 centimeter signal at redshift 5, between redshift 5.4 and 6, what are the prospects of observing it? So one good news is that basically synchrotron foregrounds are weaker at higher frequency, which correspond to lower redshift. So we have used this 21 centimeter sense, which is a publicly available code developed by Pober et al. To calculate sensitivities for 4 radio interferometric instruments: MWA, LOFAR, HERA, and SKA low. So, and we have assumed tracking mode observations of 1080 hours, which corresponds to 180 days and 6 hours of observation per day. Bandwidth is 8 megahertz and for all instruments. And we have assumed moderate foreground models, which is what is used by this 21 centimeter sense, that the horizon wedge is ignored during sensitivity calculations, but the ER window, the rest of the ER window is assumed to be clean. So these are the 4 radio interferometric instruments. So MW and LOFAR has already been observing since years, and HERA has is being built, but they have also started observing. SKA is going to come up in next few years. For all these instruments, we have used the core configuration of their antenna given by them, which is most of these are all 3 of these, LOFAR, MW and SKA are publicly available. But for HERA, split core configuration, antenna configuration is not publicly available. So we have just assumed a perfect hexagon of side 11. These are the further configuration details for each instrument. Now I won't go in detail for all of them, but one thing to note here is that all instruments, in principle at least, has capability to observe 21 centimeter signal at redshift between 5 and 6, all of them. But they don't measure this because their observations are limited to certain bands, and there are no bands at redshift lower than 6. So this is our 21 centimeter signal at redshift 5.6, and the dashed line is for the early reionization model. And these are the sensitivity predictions for 1080 hours of observation. Now, we see that even towards the end of reionization at redshift as low as 5.6, SK and HERA seem to have enough sensitivity to be able to observe 21 centimeter signal for the late reionization model for a large range of K values from around 0.1 H megaparsec inverse to 1. And the same pattern is held for a large range of redshift values. So starting from redshift 6 to around redshift 5.4, that SK and HERA, SK low and HERA look promising. Now, finally, this is the prediction. This is the evolutions of the power spectrum for the early reionization model. So this starts from redshift 5 to redshift 10, and the color bar corresponds to different K values. So in this work, we have just focused on 3 K values, 0.08 H megaparsec inverse, 0.2 and 0.5. So they are given by 3 different colors. And these are the lower limits predicted by various instruments, including GMRT, paper, MW, and LOFAR over the years at K values closest to these 3 K modes, which I had shown. So we see that there are these lower limits given by various instruments, upper limits given by various instruments have improved by orders of magnitude over the years. And like latest observations has been by MWA and LOFAR.
Janki, 3 minutes.
Okay, sure, thanks. But most of these observations has been limited to redshift higher than 6 because when these observations came up and when they were planned, most of the reionization model which people had in mind was something like this, which predicted the end of reionization by redshift 6.5. However, the latest data from both CMB and the Lyman Alpha Forest predicts that the reionization is going to be late, which means there's going to be significant power in the 21 centimeter signal between redshift 5.4 and 6. So this upcoming instruments like SK Low and HERA has enough sensitivity to observe the signal at low redshifts between 5 and 6 for 1080 hours of observation. So finally, this is the summary. In short, the observations of Lyman Alpha Forest and CMB predicts that the reionization is late, which means that there is a significant power in the 21 centimeter signal at lower redshift. And the instruments should be trying to focusing this redshift in upcoming observations. Thanks.
Thanks, Janki. Questions? Teeth.
So Janki, see, you are presenting results for like 1,000 hours for all the telescopes. Suppose I turn around, I mean, I reverse the question and ask that, what is the minimum time you need to, let's say, get a 5 sigma detection with SK and HERA, and also LOFAR and MWA? I mean, do you have an answer to that? Because I think for SK and HERA, it will be like hundred of hours or something like that. It's
Okay, so
it's much more impressive than 1,000 hours.
okay.
No.
Yes, so I don't have answer to that because I've not done this calculations, but in roughly you can say that, like, just order of magnitude assumptions, you can say that MW and HERA currently with their with their sensitivities need to do MW and LOFAR with their sensitivities need to do at least an order of magnitude improved observations to reach the SK and HERA limit, which means that if you just want a detection, probably it's just it will be similar improvements by. So I've not done exact calculations, but I think it's interesting question. I'd like to.
Desh.
Yeah, I think just from this plot, looks like there is a signal to noise of about 10, with which one hopes to detect this the sensitivity is assumed. And so 3 sigma detection should be possible in 1/10 of the time.
But yes, it might be possible. There is only like problem being that there is a lot of other.
No, sure. I'm just naively translating
sure.
this backwards. That's all.
Yeah, sure.
There are lots of practical issues. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to comment on is if it is indeed to late epochs, then it corresponds to higher frequency, as you pointed out. It's also more free of RFI and other issues. So that's something that you might want to note. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Any more questions?
Can I ask a question?
Please go on.
So nice talk. So you are showing at same Z, right? At same redshift, but wouldn't be more useful to show the at same neutral fraction?
So okay, so for now, this basically I'm just showing at the late reionization model has already been. For that we have already used the Kulkarni et al. Model. So, I mean, I've not tried changing this model to for different.
Let me put it in another way. Suppose there is an observation.
Yes.
And you know the redshift as well as you know the neutral fraction. Okay.
Okay.
And you have the power spectrum. So can you, from those 3 things, can you tell which model is correct?
Okay. Yeah.
Because so the neutral fraction is fixed for a redshift, right?
Yes.
So it's not defined for defined model. So you have those things and you need to predict which model is correct. So now what is the best way?
Okay, I don't know. I've not thought about that. I think I don't even understand the question. Can we discuss this?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Any further questions? We have time for at least one more question. Go on. I thought I saw raised hand. Please go on. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Janki. Nice talk.
Abhilash, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what kind of foreground scenario you have assumed. You have just told that it is a moderate foreground, but it's not clear to me which.
So this is a term moderate, which they use in the 21 centimeter sense in their code. So what that means is they are going to remove all the modes which are within horizon wedge, but they are going to assume that the ER window is clean. There is also an option to assume a buffer of certain k value, but we have not assumed that. We have assumed that the buffer is 0. So I mean, I know there is going to be leakage in the ER window, but that has not been included in the sensitivity calculations.
Okay, I see. So they are not considering the leakage term, so that's why they're saying it to be moderate, but they are considering it to The source is up till the horizon.
Yes.
Every source that is.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah, we may have time for one more question. If there are no further questions, then let's thank Janaki again. And I give it back to Suman maybe, right?
Right. Thank you, Shiv. Thank you for being the chair of this session, and I would like to thank all the speakers of this session for their talks. I would like to request speakers to upload their slides, which to the link that we have sent you, and you are also requested to stay for the discussion which is scheduled to be at the end of the next session, so that people can discuss with you. And finally, we will try to take a snapshot from our windows to make a photo session kind of thing. So if you would please open up your videos, and then Rajesh will take over.